Great to have everybody. Yeah, this is the HOT community webinar on advanced JOSM. I'm Russell Defner. I'm with the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team, both the community and training working groups I participate in. So this is a collaboration of the two. Before we jump into today's webinar, I just wanted to point out a couple of things that kind of kick off tomorrow. So this can, I guess, be considered a little bit of a soft launch for OSM Geo Week, which technically starts tomorrow. If you don't know about it or want to find events or post events that you happen to know of, head over to the osmgeoweek.org website. And kind of simultaneously, we're doing a soft launch of our end of year fundraising campaign for microgrants again in 2018. So I'm not sure the last time I checked, the donate.osm.org site wasn't up yet, but yeah, expect that to be up in the next couple days if it's not already. And then hopefully this little video plays. I tried testing this yesterday and the sound didn't come through, but there's no talking anyway, so if there's no sound, you're not missing anything. And this may also not be the final version of the video, so yeah, look for the final version to come out on our YouTube channel also next week. So yeah, hopefully we can do another great round of, you know, kind of this micro seeding of our local communities so they can fund some local mapping projects in 2019. So today, yeah, we're gonna kind of basically break this up. Each of us has one of these topics: layer handling, advanced editing, filters and selection, conflict resolution, and then finally relations. And with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Michael.
Yes, welcome everyone. I'm Michael. I'm currently the chair of the training working group of the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team. And so I hope you should see my JOSM right now. Can someone confirm to me that this is working?
Your desktop has come up. Yes, we can see it.
So JOSM is visible. Okay. So yes, so this is a webinar on advanced topics. So I'm pretty sure you all know what the layer window on the top right is. This is where you typically see your imagery layers, where you see your data layers. But there are a couple of things I think I would really like to point out. And as a first example, let us assume you have a situation like this, and rest assured that these waterways were not mapped by me. I think they were mapped a couple of years ago from some low-resolution Landsat imagery, but that's not the point. You like to map waterways like that. And waterways have a direction, and of course it's the direction of the flow of water. And when you only see an excerpt like this, certainly you can never be sure where that waterway is heading towards. So couple of options. Of course, you can try to zoom out and see whether it's at one end, whether it turns into the sea or into a larger river. But there is also another layer which comes in quite handy for these cases. And this is the OpenCycleMap layer. OpenCycleMap layer is a topographic layer which contains contour lines. And that is, for those who didn't know that so far, something very interesting. I zoom in, I take Bing here out, and then you see all that here across this OpenCycleMap topographic layer. And when I go up here, I see that we're here a little bit below the 250 meter contour line. So in case you can't read it, there's somewhat darker line here, and to the right is 250 meters. So we're here maybe at 230 meters altitude. And when I go back here, this here is 300 to 350 meters. So very clearly, the direction is as is indicated here from southeast to northwest. So whenever you're mapping in some terrain, want to add waterway and know exactly about the direction, this OpenCycleMap layer, which is by standard available here in the imagery menu. OpenCycleMap is one of the layers offered by standard. And if it isn't available, then you can always go to imagery preferences and activate it if it's not activated by default. So this is a very useful tool if you want to know what the terrain looks like, and for mapping waterways, this is pretty important. Of course, you will know that you can alter the sequence of your layer, so you can put Bing below OpenCycleMap and vice versa. And that second button in here, this is, just see if this is available in all projects. Well, we're talking about JOSM, so this does not have anything to do with the project. It's these are features of JOSM, and these layers are available typically worldwide. And the OpenCycleMap coverage is worldwide, so it's not confined to some specific continent. And with this icon here, you have a couple of additional controls for imagery layers. So sharpness and colorfulness is maybe not what you would need every day, but with gamma, you can control the brightness if that needs adjustment. But what I think is pretty useful, and I'll come back to that shortly, is the opacity layer. This layer enables you to see through another layer to a certain extent. And that will be pretty useful when we talk about imagery alignment, which will basically the main topic of this layer handling subject here. So just wanted to grab this example because I've heard quite often that this OpenCycleMap layer is not very well known to everyone. Let's jump to another example. So this is a partially mapped quarter. This is an example from the Philippines. You see lots of houses in here. And when we zoom in a little bit, you can see these data here. Well, that seems to be fairly well aligned with the imagery, but it often occurs that within a humanitarian project, you're asked to use a specific imagery. Typical reasons for that include that the imagery is newer or that it has less cloud coverage than one of the layers you would standardly use. And so when now I switch to a digital globe, you can easily see when looking at those buildings that they are offset. Well, the offset is not that dramatic in here. Looking at my scale on the top left is, well, it's maybe 3 or 4 meters. When we talk about imagery alignment, this can mean a couple of things. It can mean synchronizing one imagery layer with the data layer, but it can also mean that synchronizing different imagery layers. And when we talk about imagery alignment, we should always keep one thing in mind. There is no such thing as absolute truth. Of course, you can, I'll show you right now, then you can, okay, I see that I have to wait a little bit longer when I do something here on my screen. Sorry for that. I'll keep that in mind. When we talk about imagery offsets, then there is no such thing as absolute truth. You might think, well, if there are GPS traces available, then we can align everything to the GPS traces, and then you're fine. But typically, any offset we observe between different imagery layers or between imagery and already mapped data is basically what it looks like here in this imagery. We have maybe 3 or 4 meters. And if you've ever used a GPS unit and looked at the accuracy, then you will have noticed it will be anything between 5 and 10 meters. So I would say anything below 10 meters is typically within specs, and you really cannot be sure what is the absolute truth. So we should find a more pragmatic approach, and that means, what is our final goal? If we can't get absolute accuracy, but at the very least we want to achieve is a consistent map. That means we want that all buildings are on the proper side of the road and not in the middle of the road. And if a road runs next to a waterway, we want the road to be on the proper side of the waterway, and we want to see the exact number of intersections between those two, and we want to know whether it's a ford or a bridge. So these are things most needed in humanitarian context, because people want to reach those in need on the ground, those in the buildings, and so they have to find that location with respect to other entities on the map. But it really doesn't matter whether it's 5 or 10 meters offset. So if someone told you to use this digital globe standard imagery, which is currently visible here, maybe because it's newer, and you run into a situation like this, of course you might want to compare it with GPS traces. If you compare it with the Bing imagery, you will see, well, we're talking about differences of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 meters, and so it doesn't matter to really try to adapt that to any GPS traces. What we want to do and what we need to do is, however, that we must make sure if we now add some buildings, we add them in proper relation to the existing buildings. And in this case, where lots of buildings, or nearly all buildings here, had been mapped with respect to Bing, you would rather adjust the digital globe imagery to the existing mapping. So what can you do to achieve this? Well, one thing is, with the imagery here, you have you can either select the imagery offset menu item and then choose the proper imagery, the one you want to change. But you can also use this icon here in the top toolbar. This is a shortcut for adjust imagery offset. And when you click on it, you simply have to select the imagery layer you want to adjust. In this case, it would be digital globe standard imagery. And now you obtain a window which tells you the exact offset position in meters. And when you click somewhere on the map, this imagery starts moving, and you can move it until those buildings match the imagery more properly. Would maybe be something like this here, and you can see then, okay, we have a lateral offset of 3 meters and a vertical one of 50. That's typically the quickest way to adjust the imagery. There are other alternative ways. There is also something which is called the imagery offset database, and that might sometimes be useful as well. If we activate it in this case, and that requires the imagery offset database plugin to be activated, then you get an icon, an additional icon here in the toolbar. It's the right one here, which looks pretty similar to the imagery offset one I just used. And when You click on that, your computer will connect to this imagery offset database and try to find if some people entered offset data for that particular imagery layer you're currently viewing around the location you are currently viewing. So if we choose this one, then it prompts us here with a couple of options. And you should particularly pay attention to two things here. First of all, in the top line, you see the vintage of those data. You see the 4 data you can see in here are all from 2016. That doesn't sound too bad, but if you find that entries here are more than a few years old, then I would be cautious, because imagery providers, of course, regularly update their imageries every few years maybe. And of course, the adjustments may vary. And here at the right of each entry, you see where the spot someone entered is located. So the top one is just 1 kilometer to the south-southwest. So this might well apply to the imagery in here as well. I'm not quite sure what the radius is, so it doesn't present you with adjustment values tens of kilometers away, but even if it's 5 or 6 kilometers away, it might change a bit. So we can give this top one a try. It says it would basically shift everything something like less than 4 meters to the east, and well, doesn't look too bad either. So if you're not sure about imagery alignment, if you've not that many features to align your map to, you could give this database a try. And it is always a better idea to align the imagery to the existing mapping than the other way around, because as you can see here, there is a whole quarter of that city has been mapped with buildings, and it's really no fun aligning all those buildings and roads. So aligning data to imagery is something you should only do if you have a very good reason. For instance, if you find out that the imagery which was used for that mapping is really tens of meters off from any other imagery and from any other GPS traces, but you will rarely run into such a situation. As I explained, most of the imagery differences are below 10 meters, and that is within accuracy specs of GPS. And so you can't tell the absolute truth and just look what sounds more convenient for you. Typically, the most convenient way will be to adjust the imagery you should work with to the layers you want to work with. And yes, and if there are hardly any features there, give the offset database a try. You might well run into another situation, and that is an example I've prepared in here. Well, this is not what we want to use. We want to compare those here. It might well be that when you work for a humanitarian project, you are presented with a task where nobody else has been mapping anything. You just see a high voltage line, but that typically isn't really visible on an imagery unless it's really high resolution. So, and you have been told that you should work with the Esri imagery and not the Bing imagery. So Bing is what we currently see. And then you try, well, and then you see, oops, there is something really strange going on in here. There is a, oops, not this one. There is a considerable offset, something like 30 or 40 meters. And that means if you want to work with Esri, for instance, you really have to, and if people tell you that, for instance, Bing is the standard and most features have typically been mapped with Bing, but you should use Esri in this example, maybe it has less cloud coverage, maybe it's newer, then you will have to adjust one to the other. Well, there are no buildings mapped so far, no roads, and if you try, you won't find any GPS traces. By the way, if you don't know how to obtain GPS traces, when you download map data and use this icon, then in the top, you have a couple of checkboxes. Typically, the one activated is OpenStreetMap data, and next to it is raw GPS data. So when you activate the raw GPS data and then download, what you obtain here is a layer with downloaded GPX data, but there are none in this area. So it's right in the middle of somewhere in Africa, no GPX data available, nothing has been mapped previously. So how can we do the alignment here? Of course, you could start mapping some roads to one imagery, mapping some buildings, and then try to shift one imagery layer to the other one. Well, there is an even quicker way. We have now we have the Bing imagery here. We want to align Esri to Bing, probably. So let's put Esri on top of Bing and then reduce its opacity. So this would be that now we would only see Bing. Let me wait a little bit. And if you increase the opacity, then you will arrive at a state when you can, more or less see both imageries on top of each other. And if there are some very clearly visible features like those roads, you can now start to adjust have to make the Esri layer as the active layer, and then you can start adjusting this. And in this way, I can easily move it so until these imagery layers match. And then, well, now you're done. The next thing you should notice when you look at this example is we have a really weird offset. So we have laterally 23 meters, vertically more than 30 meters. This is not common. So whenever you see this, you should be cautious. Now, let's move to the other end of the task square. Let me readjust the opacity of that layer. And now you've got and when you now try to switch between those two imageries, it might be better to use the opacity again, because then you can see that. Now it's static imagery, which is easier for you. You can see in the top left corner now here we've got a 40 or so meter offset. And when I erase that offset again, you see, well, here in this example, the Esri and the Bing imagery seem to match well. So whenever you see a huge offset, more than 10 or 15 meters, you should not blindly accept that and then start mapping, but you should try to investigate if there is a reason. Well, if we have such a variation of 30 to 40 meters, such a relatively small difference, then you should try to figure out what the difference is in between some here. And because that is absolutely fairly unusual. So, the problem here, by the way, is less the Esri imagery, but a closer inspection of that layer tells you that something is definitely not in order with that layer. You can let me put it like this. Just need this one again. Full opacity. Yeah. So here we are still out of order. Sorry for jumping out a little bit, but just wanted to show you specific portion here. There it's still, yep, there we are. And here you can see this here is Bing imagery. There is one way coming up from the north, and there is the continuation to the south. And here is a huge gap. And when we compare that with Esri, now we can see that this road, of course, is continuous. And when we move all here a little bit further to the east here in this area, you can see another discontinuity. When you compare it with the scale on the upper left side, you can easily see, well, that's the reason for this 30 to 40 meter offset. Well, there obviously something went definitely wrong with image processing. Fortunately, it is not that frequent, but things like that do occur. So my advice is, if you have imagery offsets and offsets between imagery and map data, which are below 10 meters, then don't worry to find out what is the truth, as there is no absolute truth. Try to, if you are ordered to use a specific imagery, try to adjust that imagery to existing mapping in order to achieve a consistent map. If something is way out of order, like in this example which I presented to you, then of course you must adjust the imagery you want to use, maybe to another imagery. But you should do a quick check, maybe in the four corners, if the imagery offset is really constant across the whole task you like to work on. Because as I've shown to you in this example, weird things may happen. And if you assume that I might have been looking the whole last week in order to find such a weird example, then I must drastically disappoint you. The area you are viewing is from one of the projects of last week's Missing Maps Mapathon in London. So if you work for humanitarian projects, you can easily run into such a situation. And I just would like to draw your attention that you mind your step when walking across such a task square. If it was some imagery pulled specific, where you have been told it was pulled specifically for a project, it might be worthwhile to notify those responsible for that, particularly the project manager of the project, that there is a huge problem here, so that he might contact the imagery agency or at least put out a warning to others mapping in here. Yes, before closing my remarks, I just wanted to come back to that GPS layer that goes in line here with that example. What I usually do is, when I first download GPS data to get a rough idea where everything is aligned to GPS or there is some serious misalignment, it is a good idea, first of all, to modify it a little bit. There is a context menu for GPS where you can customize two things. You can customize the color, and as you can see here in my JOSM, typically I use something like pink or purple because that is rarely used for anything else in most maps here, so it stands out clearly. And customized track drawing allows you to increase the width of GPX lines. Normally it's more or less a hairpin indicated by a 0. I usually use something like 2 pixels, and then I move this layer on top of any data layers, and that makes it stand out pretty clearly. If it's an area where several people have added GPS traces, you might from time to time run across some which seem to be pretty weird, running across everything. This might be that someone recorded its GPS unit while sitting on a plane across that area, but it might also be that the GPS unit might still have been initializing immediately after switching on. Mine, for instance, might, depending on the conditions, easily take 2 or 3 minutes before I get a solid fix, and any recorded coordinates before that are simply grossly offset. You can filter them out a little bit. So the GPX data has another context menu, and that means choose visible tracks. And then you get a menu of all tracks in here. And as you can see, there are 2 tracks which I filtered out. So typically you can just activate one, or you can activate show all. And then you see that you will get weird spikes as visible in this imagery, and then it might be, and if that really obscures lots of the things you wanted to see, it might be worthwhile to find out. Oh, that's obviously the last one recorded here. This one has those spikes, and then it's typically recommended to say, well, I want to see all those other GPS traces show selected only, but not the last one, which I excluded, and that's what I presented you previously. So unless there are really 50 or 100 different tracks visible, but in most humanitarian contexts, you can be happy if you see any. And then if there are some which obscure your image and don't seem to be connected to reality, you can just filter them out. That is basically what I wanted to tell you about this layer menu and imagery and data alignment issues. And I think we should add maybe a few minutes if there are any questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I just allowed people to unmute themselves. So if there are any questions, we'll probably just keep it to like one or two because I think we're running a little over our expected time. So want to make sure that we have plenty of time for the other presenters. Okay, well, yeah, if there's no questions now, we'll probably also do a final Q&A at the end. So if something comes up or you think of something, you know, during the next couple presentations that relates to what Michael talked about, then yeah, we'll try to get those questions answered at the end. So now we're advanced editing. I think that's Ralph, correct?
Yes, that's me coming up now.
All right, great.
Right. I'm going to be handling a number of items today. It would be complicated building drawing, how to handle arrays of identical objects. Sorry, is everyone happy? Can they all hear me?
You come over great.
Everything looks and sounds good.
Right, okay. And arrays of identical objects and how to handle that. And also one important thing that a lot of people seem to have a difficulty with is where roads and rivers intersect. So I'm going to start off first of all with the complicated buildings. Right, starting off with the slippy map. I'm going to go, I don't want this, let's just see.
Yeah,
Right,
we're just seeing your JOSM. So if there's something in the way, it's not affecting the presentation.
okay. Right, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'd like, first of all of you to have a look and can you see the hot community webinar page that I've got on?
Yes.
Okay, what I need you to do is to take a screenshot of this. I'll give you a few moments to take a screenshot because this is all the things that I will try and cover in this tutorial. And I'm going to then go through them. You can keep this for a reminder of what we covered today. Right, are we all okay? Can we continue? Right, I've now gone to my JOSM page. I'm going to do a download and take you to my hometown for my first demonstration. Right, let's come in here.
Ralph, we still see the community webinar page.
Ah, okay. Let's just new share. Right, okay, it swaps better. How's that?
That's good.
Okay, I've taken you into Portsmouth to do our complicated buildings. This is taking a bit longer than it should. Okay, I'm going to use, that's what I found out, these controls get in the way. Imagery, I'm going to use Bing because that's very good in this area. And I'm going to zoom in here. Now, here we are looking at a complex building shapes. I can see that this whole building here appears to be one complex, and then there's one or two additional adjoining buildings which are separate. Now I can see they're separate because of the configuration of the roof, and also if you look at the gardens alongside them, you can see that they are actually separate little gardens, which indicates to me that those will be separate from the main building here, but adjoining. Now to start with, using our shortcut keys, I'm going to use B. We start off with the basic building shape. So we start off here. In ID, you were able to go around and click on each corner of the building with the area tool. But here in JOSM, we build up the building piece by piece using the building tool. Yeah. So let's just show you how we then add the next section. Selecting the building so that you are squaring to the building. You then press the B key on your board to get the building tool back again, and you just add that. The next thing that you do is to hold the Shift key, select, hold the Shift key, and select the other building. They're now both highlighted. Holding down the Shift key and pressing J will merge the two buildings together. Now, this works absolutely brilliantly when your tags are all the same. Remembering that when you use the building tool, it will always come up as building yes. Okay? So, providing that the original building or the building you're doing is all building yes, you can continue adding on pieces. Using the building tool, select, hold down Shift J. They're all supposed to be, there we are, Shift J. Right, now you get a bad join. This can simply be removed by deleting the odd nodes that occur. Please check that those odd nodes are deleted because we don't want too many extra nodes on the building. But now, let's just say that your building is not a building yes. Let's edit that and say it is apartments, okay? The next time you add something, all right, press the B key to add, and you add the next section of the building, and you try select, shift. There we go. If you want to merge these, you'll see that it says two different. When you try to merge them, shift J, you get a dialog box that will come up, which asks you to choose a value. Okay, and that will be, you will have to choose apartment. So each time you do this, you will have to add that adjustment for the tags. Now, I'm going to show you another way of doing this so that you don't have that conflict. Now, you can see your building is now apartments. I am going to show you how to use the extrude key. That is the shortcut key X. Press X and you will see that your cursor changes. Using the extrude key, you can double click at a point where you want to add your new section of the building, and you just drag that section of the building as far as you want it to go, right? And what happens? The tag remains the same. So if there's any single or multiple complex tags here, they will stay the same. So you're using the extrude tool to build your building, adding a node and then dragging. Here we have another area where we can add the node, or let's get rid of that thing, and then extrude outwards. Add a node by double clicking, add a node by double clicking, and extrude the line outwards. And you can continue this for the rest of the building, right? And there we have it. Now here you can see there's an extra little section there that you want to add. And it's as simple as that. Again, all the tags are remaining the same. Now let's take a look at adding on an extra item. I'm going to go back to my select tool by pressing S, and I'm having a look here. This is set back slightly from the front of this building and set there. What I will do is add a node here simply by pressing the A key on my keyboard and double click a node onto there. Select and I will use the building tool, select B on that node, and drag it outwards. Now I have to allow for this, so I use the X key again, press X, and I drag that outwards. Now I have set the new building. This one will be offset in, so I press the A key, add the node, escape, use the B key for the building, and I join those two nodes and extend outwards. I've got another building here. I repeat with the building tool, use those two nodes and extend outwards. Now, those are all now, new ones are building yes. They have not taken on the apartment building tags because I did not extrude. I added those with buildings. For complex little areas, let's just say we want to join across here. We're going to use a different set of tools. First of all, that's the join point. So I will press the A key, escape, A key, and add my node there, escape. That's going to link those two. But that is the join point. You see where the building joins? The node is in actual fact a bigger square than the other. I want to join this to there. What I can do straight away is select that node. That's the node I want to move, and I select this node is the node I want to move it to, and I use the M key merge on my keyboard and press M. And that node automatically jumps to there, and you can see it retains the joined building node, which is quite large square compared to the other. That is the simple, easy way of creating complex shapes of buildings. I want to show you, this is not working too well, but let me see if I have grabbed what I need to grab. I want to show you something. Here we are. Right, here we have someone who has, instead of showing the individual buildings, has drawn one single large building. I would like to, in actual fact, draw that, but I don't want to lose the history of what happened previously. So the history of this, if you press Control H, and we have the history that comes up that says Chris Parker drew this in Potlatch. Here is the change set information. It gives you the nodes information as well. Right? Now, I don't want to lose this. So what I do is I drag this aside and I started drawing afresh. So this is the building I want to do. So I press my building key, escape. I don't want that affecting it, so escape. Using the building tool, I will draw the basic shape. I can see from this garden here that this is two separate buildings, but I want the history on both of those buildings. So I will press my S key. We're slowing down a bit here. Sorry about this. JOSM seems to be taking its time. Oops.
A little too much, I guess.
Yes.
Take your time, Ralph. Yeah, if anybody has questions
right.
or anything. Oh, there you go. I was going to say.
Yeah, got it. Right, I've got it right. Now, I'm going to select both of these. So using my select tool and my shift tool, I select both of those. I then press down shift, press down control, and I press G. You'll see that this building has now disappeared, and that building has now taken on the keys of the previous building. If we go to Control H and have a look at the history now, the history now shows that Chris Parker drew the first building, and I have now drawn the second building. Now I want to change the source of the second building because I'm using a different source. I'll close that now. So I will edit the source to say I am using Bing. Okay, and now I have added my building as Bing. Now, as I pointed out, this is not one building, this is two buildings. So I am going to show you how I can quickly change that by simply using the Shift key and T. This brings up the Terrace a House dialog box, and I want this in two segments. You can change that to 3, 4, 12, however segments are involved. I'm just going to use the two segments, okay, and that splits my building. Now you can see here that I have now got the building split. I use my extrude key again and extrude the building outwards. Now I can't use the extrude again because I want to join these. So what I do is I use the select key, select that building, building key, and I join with this node and create that section of building. Select key, hold the shift down, and we've got both. I then use the shift key and J to join those two together. I have two leftover nodes which I can delete, and there I have the building, two separate buildings with the correct shape, and I can look at the Control H history, and you will see now that Chris Parker's Potlatch version is there, and my new Bing version with JOSM is also there. So I've kept the geometry, I've kept the history, and I've created the two buildings. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Right, now I'm going now to another area to demonstrate my next section. Let's go to South America here. Right, the city of Coro. Yes, and I will select here, download. Oh, that's going a bit quicker. Right, and I'm going to use my Bing imagery again to give you an example of repetitive buildings. Okay. To do repetitive buildings, it's quite easy. We can, first of all, set our building tool to what we want. Okay, so if we go to data, you have got a number of ideas here. Set building shape to circle if you are doing repetitive circles. You can set your building shape to rectangle, which we do have at the moment. So we will use that. I will press the B key to add a building. Oh, I have already checked this. There is an offset oblique angle, so you can see some of the wall there. So I'm setting the building to the footprint of the building that I can see at the side here. The roofs are slightly offset because, as you can see by the shadow, they're actually higher than each other. So this is one building, not sort of offset little buildings. I'm going to use that as, now what I can do is I can select and Control copy, your normal copy and paste. Keeping my tool on the select, I put it in the center of where I want the next one to be, and I use Control V. And you have that. You can do slight adjustment to position it. Now this is ideal if all the buildings are in the same direction. Control V. You see it keeps the correct tagging. So if you tag the first building with whatever it's supposed to be, apartment or residential or whatever it is, then all of the following will be the same tagging. Now there is another way that you can do this if the buildings are not all identically angled, and that is to use your set building size. Okay, now to set the building size, you will need to know the size of the building. I have got at the bottom here a measurement tool, so I will measure the building size, and I note that that is 25.2 meters at the bottom there, and then I take it sideways and I see it is 25, let's say 25 by 15, right? So when I use my set building size, Control Alt B, it asks me for a rectangle with a width of 15 and 25. Okay, when I use my building tool now, it will automatically give me a building that size. If I want to align it, I can align the building to its next position. So that if you have buildings which have different alignments but are the same size, then you can do that as well by using this tool. Okay, there's one other tool that I would like you to have a look at when doing. Oh no, okay, I'll move on. Let's go to our next section. I'm watching the time, and let's go to the next section. For this one, I'm going to go to Africa, and I'm going to zoom into Malawi. And I want to look at the rivers. Right, once again, I'm going to use my Bing imagery. Now, what I want to do is show you here the road and river intersections. I've chosen a river here which doesn't have any intersections, so that I can actually build the road and show you what we're going to be talking about. The roads here are all unpaved, so many of them will be how can I say, difficult to tell what you're looking at. First of all, let's look at this one here. Here we can see there's definitely a structure over the river, and there's definitely a shadow there. Now that shadow and the width tells me that this is a bridge. So I am going to add the road. Make it highway unclassified. Right. Now, that would give me, when I run a validation, that will tell me that I have something here to fix. To be able to do this, all you need to do is to select a node at the end of each bridge. Select the nodes, press the P key to separate this section of the road from the other road. That gives you highway unclassified. We're going to add the bridge, which is bridge, yes, and okay. But what we have to remember is that what we're doing is telling our OpenStreetMap that this bridge goes over the river. To be able to indicate that, we have to add a layer
thì Yên apakah coba?
Okay, right. What I've done now is to show that the bridge goes over the river. I've added layer 1, okay, which puts the bridge up over the river. That will now mean that anyone who's using the river will have a continuous path under the bridge. Anyone who's using the road will have a continuous path over the road. Now, here we have a road on this side, a road on this side, and a road on that side. But there's no discernible or noticeable bridge anywhere. This would be given as a ford. So in other words, the road runs through the river. Let's put the road in. So I select A and I add the road as it goes through. Select, and I will once again add that as highway unclassified. Right. Now here, the road and the river will be at the same level. So I have to add a node, select A, and when both the river is highlighted and the road is highlighted, my node is at exactly the join point. Add the node, and I am then going to give that the tag for a ford. Ford, yes. Okay. Now that indicates that the road is continuous but runs through the river, and the river is continuous and runs at the same level as the road. So we don't need to add a layer because they're both at the same level. If we had carrying along the river, there's another bridge you can see clearly. However, another bridge. Right, there is no example here that I can show you because the river is too big. It would need to have been on a small stream, right? Now the stream and the road, you'd be able to see the road running over the stream, but not the stream. So in other words, the stream is going under the road, but the road does not have a bridge. Adding the road, and adding the stream, right. To do this, we do the same as we did for the bridge, but we do it on the river. We select two nodes either side of the road. We press our P key to separate it off, and then we add the keys tunnel, culvert. Okay, now the culvert goes underneath the bridge, underneath the road. So the next tag that needs to be there is layer, and it goes under, so it is going to be -1, and you add that. Now we know that while the road still goes over the river, this river goes under, layer -1 goes under the road. And once again, that will satisfy all the validation requirements of JOSM. Those intersections are now correctly done for running through the river, the road over the river, and the river under the road. Those are the various items that you would need to know. Thank you very much, and happy mapping. Right, Russ, over to you.
Yeah, awesome, Ralph. Let's go ahead. Sabine had one question. I think this will be our one question for you. Let me find it back in the chat.
Right.
So yeah, the only thing is that if you manipulate the section afterwards, they would end up. Oh, so this. Let me actually back. So this is relating to the terrace.
Right. Okay.
Buildings.
Yes.
Yeah. So they end up off square. It's extremely fiddly to make them halfway square. Was wondering if there's an easier way to manipulate them and/or correct angles afterwards. So yeah, Sabine, and actually, if you want, I'll allow you to unmute if I didn't get your question properly.
Right. You asked if there was any way that you could change the building once it had been drawn. I'm going to just do it roughly here so that we can create what we were talking about. That was the one that I was saying with the resize building. I'm going to set my tool back. Right, under data, I'm going to set my tool back to rectangle. What we would have to do is with your resizing, okay, the one thing that you have to do is set your building size back to 0 before you can carry on, okay? Now, using the building tool, there it is. Select, Control Copy, Control V, and there you have your building. Now, if you want, in actual fact, to rotate your building after you've created it, it will rotate around the center point only by using the Shift and Control key. Now, using that and holding your cursor down, your left hand button on your mouse down, you can rotate it around its central axis. Okay? So you can actually change the direction of the building after you've copied and pasted. Another thing that you can do after you've copied and pasted is to use the Control-Alt key. And that will resize your building. That's Control and Alt. So you can resize it after you've done it. That's very specifically when you're doing circles. If you are doing circles, right, the Control-Alt allows you to change the size of the circle. Now, as you know, when you're doing huts in a small village, not all the huts are the same size. They vary in size throughout the little village. So you can copy and paste and resize simply by using Control-Alt of the article you put in. Okay? Just drag towards it or away from it, and you will resize the article. Does that help to answer your question?
I actually think Sabine left before we got to it, so hopefully it did. If not, and yeah, if you come back and watch this recording and looking for the answer and we didn't get it to you, then just reach out to us via email.
Okay, then I'll hand back to you, Russ, and you can move on to the next section.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks, Ralph. That was great. Looks like we have Geoffrey with filters and selections, if I'm correct, up next.
Yes. Yeah, Ralph, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Yep, I have done so.
Thank you. Yeah, can someone let me know if you can see my JOSM?
Yep, I've got you.
Yes, got you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about filters, the to-do list plugin, and also using the rectangular selection. So I'm going to start with filters. Filters allow you to disable, hide, select, or highlight specific groups of objects based on flexible custom parameters. And I'm just going to show us how to use a few examples of filters. So the first thing you have to do is to add your filter window. So if I activate my filter, it will show up on the right-hand side here. I'm also going to just deactivate my image area so that you can see what the filters do. So basically what you have to do is to add, and I'll just start with just a basic example. So let us say in my project, I want just to see only roads without categorizing them. So I'm going to just write a filter and say my filter string will be building all. So if I submit my filter, it will show up the string just below here, and you can obviously see there is a change in my window. Sorry, I've just done a filter to show only buildings. So there are three buttons here. One is E. There are three checkboxes. One is E, which is enable. The next one is H, which is hide. And the other one is inverse filter. So if I activate all of them, what's going to happen is it will show only buildings and hide everything else. If I deactivate my I, which is inverse filter, it's going to hide the buildings and show everything else in my data layer. And if I uncheck hide, what's going to happen is it will show the other features in a grayed out view and just highlight the buildings. So that's a basic example of how to show only buildings in your data layer. So the other example of a filter I want to show you, before that, I'm just going to show you just one simple thing. If we go to your edit and preferences, and you activate the expert mode, and say OK, when you come back and try to add another filter, you'll have more options in your filter window, dialog box. So what you're seeing here are just different examples of different filters that you can build. For example, I may want to see data that has been contributed by a certain user in my data layer. So I can just go on and pick it from here and say user. So I'm putting the username of the person, and then I submit my filter. And now I can activate the H and the I. And what is showing me now is data that has been contributed by that particular user in my data layer. So that's another example. Yeah, the other one that I would want to show is you may want to see data that has been changed in a certain time frame, that has been modified in your data layer. And to do that, you may want to use a timestamp filter. So I'm just going to write 1. So I write timestamp and then the date. So right as I want to see data that has been contributed in this area in August, from August 1st, that will be the filter string. So if I submit this filter and activate the hide and the inverse, so I can see that no data was done in this area during that. I'll just reduce so I missed something. So I have to put a slash at the end. Okay, so I'll just modify the date a little bit. Okay, so now you can see data that was contributed from August the 1st until now. But if I want to see in a certain, up to certain time limit, so
Geoffrey, sorry to interrupt you, but there is a problem. We don't see any dialogues. We only see your main JOSM window. So the filter dialog somehow is not visible.
Okay, thank you. Let me try to sort that out.
Yeah, I wonder, that might be a weird one where you got to share the whole screen, because if you share just the app, it doesn't share all the side windows and stuff.
Okay, I've just tried to share a second time. So can you now see the dialog box?
Now it works.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So yeah, so I'll just do another timestamp to show a filter between a certain time frame. So I want from data was contributed in that area from August 1st to August 31st, 2018. So if I submit my filter and then I activate hide and the inverse, I'll see that only these objects were modified during that time frame from the 1st to the 31st. So another useful filter is you may want to combine two things. So let us say I want to see all the waterways in this area, but I want to combine that with the highways. So my filter string will be waterway or highway. And if I submit that and activate it, then I'll be able now to see just the roads, but also the drainage, other waterways. So yeah, the filters help you to just filter out and look at the specific type of data. The other one that is very useful is when you want to see data that you have modified yourself. So let's say you have downloaded data in a big area, but just want to look at the data you have been working on when you were making changes in JOSM. And the filter to use there will be new and then modified. Yeah, so if I this is modified. So if I submit that filter and activate, so there is just one particular building which I have modified, and I just want to use that as an example. So it picks that out in the whole data set, and you just see your changes that you have been working on. So moving on, the next thing I want to show is the to-do list plugin. The to-do list plugin is useful if you are working on things like validation of data, or you're working on imports. So it allows you to specify and work on a list of items directly within JOSM. So I'll add it to my project, and of course we'll have to install this from the preferences if you don't have it. I've already have mine installed, and then it's under the Windows menu. So if I activate it, it will show up here. So let me say I want to have a look at all the schools specifically in this area, and I just want to look at one item by one item. So what I will do is add a filter and filter out my data and have only schools pop up. So I'll add the filter string, which is amenity equals school. So I'll use the key and value to do the filter. So if I hide and invert the selection, I'll see only the points for schools pop up. The teeny dots may not be able to see, but what I'm going to do is to select. So I'm going to use the rectangular selection. So I'm doing the rectangular selection, and I'm selecting all the data. And now what I will do is to go to my to-do list in the right-hand side here and click on Add. And what this will do is to add all the data in the to-do list. So this is useful if you have been doing like even data collection in the field, and you are pushing data to OSM, and you want to go item by item, and you want to make sure everything is okay before you push OSM. So what you do is just to double click. For example, I'll double click Gaba demonstration school. So JOSM will automatically zoom to that, and I will have a look at the tags. I think I can also activate the image array. So I can look at the tags. Can even now deactivate and see the data. So I can look at the tags to make sure they're okay, and also if the node is in the right place. And after checking that, I'll simply say mark. So when you say mark, it removes that particular feature from your to-do list and jumps on to the next. So this is another one, which is Spirit Academy and Daycare. So I'll do the same, just look at the location and make sure it is okay. Look at my tags, make sure they are fine. So in case anything is not okay, then I'll be able to modify it. Then mark that as complete, and then it will jump to the next one. So then you can go item by item until everything is checked. So using that, you can be sure that I've checked everything within my data layer that I want to specifically look at. And if you want to clear the to-do list, if you right-click, there's several options, and one of them is clear. I'll clear my to-do list because I want to show you something else now. I'm going to activate my buildings filter. So as you continue building different filters, they stay in your filter history, filter strings history, so you can always reuse them. So I'm going to activate the buildings so that I can see all the buildings. So let us say I want to add these buildings to the to-do list. There will be one issue here. If I select using the rectangular selection, what's going to happen is it's going to select the nodes and also the ways. And you know, buildings are ways. So I don't want the nodes to be selected when I make that kind of selection. Because if I add it to my to-do list, for example, I can show you here. If I add it to my to-do list, it will add both ways and nodes, and my interest is just to look at only the ways. So you can see here it is showing data layer, and if I double click, it is going to a node. That's not my intention. My intention is to look at only ways. So I'm going to clear the to-do list and just show you the right way of doing it. So what I'll do in this case is to make my selection using the rectangular selection tool, and then I'm going to press Shift plus U. So pressing Shift plus U, what it does is to unselect the nodes. So now I'm having my ways selected, but not the nodes, which is exactly what I want. And now I can go on and add them to the to-do list. So I have all my buildings, and now I can now go on and check building by building as I make the necessary changes and corrections. So I finish that particular building, and then I click mark, jumps on to the next, mark, jumps on to the next. So that is the unselect node, very useful. So I think that's, those are the three things I wanted to show you. The to-do list, the rectangular selection, and the filter. So I think that's the end of my part. I'll hand over to you back, Russ, and I can take on any questions if there is any.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Geoffrey. I guess, yeah, real quick, I'll, in case somebody has a pressing question they want to ask right now, I will let you guys unmute yourselves for a moment. If not, we'll jump right into the last couple sections. Yeah, Geoffrey, if you want to stop sharing and Michael get prepped for the next one.
Okay.
Yep.
And we're doing fairly well on time. I think you and I can get these next two done in the next half hour.
Well,
and
certainly. So.
Oh wait, hold on. Franz asked a question. This is typical a search for not squared buildings. Why not use the validation tool? To Geoffrey.
So we come again with a question.
The question is, this is typically a search for not squared buildings. Why not use the validation tool? Am I reading that correct, friends?
Okay, so a typical search for not squared buildings. Why not use the validation tool? Yeah, I don't think that was part of my presentation, but yeah, if you are looking for buildings that are not squared, using the validation tool would do that. But also there are ways where the unselecting nodes and just using the to-do list to go one by one also helps, especially when you're doing adding attributes from the field. If people have done like field data collection and you have added things on each building, you want to go building by building and making sure all the tags are okay.
Yeah, I think I think the answer is really, what your purpose is. If you're just looking to square buildings, then yeah, the validation tool is probably fine, but the search and filters are for a little bit more complicated inquiries. But yeah, Franz, we can discuss that off the webinar as well. So yeah, maybe, and I've noticed a few people are putting additional tools and tricks in the comments, and that's great. I'll capture those as well because this is the first time we're doing the advanced JOSM training. So we figured people would probably come with other workflows that work maybe even better than the ones we've come up with. So for next time, we'll take everybody's comments and see how we can improve. So yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and get into conflict with Michael.
Yeah, it's me again. So I hope everyone can see the slides right now.
Yep.
So the most important thing is the headline. If you run into a conflict, you do not necessarily have done something wrong, but it can easily happen. So what is a conflict? Typically, you will see that when you edit roads, you edit a road at some point, improve the way, add some adjacent roads, and someone else does the same a few kilometers down the road, and unfortunately he happens to upload his changes earlier than you do, and when you then upload your changes, your version is not the most current one. The database has a newer one, the one from the other person editing, and that is nothing which can be resolved automatically, so it will be your turn to match that, and that is exactly what this form tells you. So when you upload and you end up with this conflicts detected warning here, then you know that is exactly what happened. And well, you've got two choices here. Basically, there is a third choice. It says click cancel to abort and continue editing. Well, continue editing is not what I can recommend because this kind of problem is not of the self-healing sort. So you can either synchronize that way, which is in conflict here, or you can synchronize the entire data set. Synchronizing the entire data set is what I definitely recommend. That means it checks all your uploads, whether there will be any further conflicts, download all the required data for that, and present you with this. Because typically, yes, I end up with maybe 1, 2, or 3 ways in conflict, and that's manageable. If you would end up with 50 or 60 ways in conflict, then it is tempting, well, just to forget about your edits, delete the layer and start all over again, because resolving conflicts for tens of layers is not really fun. But in most cases, it will be limited. So I always synchronize the entire data set just to get an overview over the volume of work which is waiting for me. And that means that it downloads the versions from the server, but keeps it separate so that it can present you with the differences. And yes, so hopefully after that it says there was just 1 conflict or maybe 3 conflicts or so detected. And on the right side of your JOSM window, where you've got all this layer and properties windows, there is also one for conflicts. If it is not yet visible, you can pull it from the Windows menu, and it looks pretty much like this one here. So it would mention all the conflicts detected, and there is a button for resolve. So you can select one of those entries and hit resolve, or you can double click one entry, and that opens a window which helps you to make the best out of those 2 versions, the one on the server and your own one, which could not be uploaded. And this one looks a bit intimidating at first, so I'll enlarge that a little bit so that you've got a chance to see what's happening here. Basically, this window consists of 3 columns. The left one is your version, and the right one is the version on the server, and the central one is the one you're going to construct, because you have to take the best of both worlds. And in order to facilitate this, the entries are colored. Green are nodes which are unchanged. The red ones are nodes which have been added, and the ones in the salmon color are those which are present on both your version and the server version, but not at an identical position. So we can clearly see what happened here. I added nodes at the end. In the left part here, you can see that I added nodes at the end of that road, while another user did so somewhere in between. And we might also have slightly different versions of those here in between. So clearly the way to go would be, first of all, to accept everything from the server version here on the right side, and then add those additional nodes from my version on the left side. And after that, one might revisit that way and see if those versions in between, which might have slightly different positions here, need some adjustment. So, and what you select from which pane is basically governed with these buttons. So if there is nothing else additionally selected, you only have the choice of adding everything you see. So this means the lowest button here, which is marked, would copy everything from the server side onto the merged version, and that would be the first step to start with. So just want to make sure, yes. So we accept all the nodes from the server because we say, well, we just added those few nodes here on the left, which are marked red, and all the rest is basically okay. So after that, we see a slightly changed version here. The merged version now contains all the nodes from the server side here on the right. And the next step is that we will have to add our added nodes here down this way. So that means we can't simply add everything, but we need to select those nodes here. And selected nodes appear in blue in order to let them stand out more clearly. And then you have to copy those nodes just to the merged version. And of course, you have to tell the system where you want to do that. It doesn't know that. So there is one button where you can add it to the end. There is another button that would be the top one here, where you can put them at the front of this merged version. And if you select exactly one node of the merged version, then two more buttons would become active. So that means insert right below or right above that node. So you always have full control over the position where you can merge these entries. In this case, we added them at the end of the way, so we want to see them here at the end of the way. So it's clearly this one is the button of choice. If that somehow doesn't work for you, there is click freeze to finish merging and add their entries. So sometimes it says it's frozen, and then you have a button where you can unfreeze the display. So if nothing happens while you want to add something, just have a look what's happening in here. Yeah, so, and finally, this was, again, on the right column, the version from the server. On the left column, again, our version with nothing else left to be done. And the merged version now contains that what we composed over the past few steps. And then you say apply resolution, and you've got clean new layer, which should no longer be in conflict with the version on the server because we integrated that. And then you simply have to go back in JOSM and upload again. And well, unless someone else made any additional changes while you were editing this conflict, things should go pretty smoothly. So, yes, so that is just want with this short presentation of slides, I just wanted to, well, make sure that you're not really intimidated by this conflict window. It has a pretty logical layout, and managing conflicts isn't as bad as it looks, but of course, the better way would always be to avoid conflicts. Well, if you're just editing buildings in a task of a hot project, then it's fairly unlikely that you will run into a conflict. Conflicts will occur when you edit roads or when you edit boundaries or larger residential or natural areas. And whenever you do that, the rule of thumb is try to upload pretty often in order to minimize conflicts. So if you run into conflict, it's highly likely that only one or two of your objects are in conflict, and you won't have that much work to do in conflict resolution. So that's basically all I wanted to do here, and I'd really like to leave enough time for Russ with his final talk about relations.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll open up the mics if anybody wants to jump in real quick and ask anything about conflict resolution before we move. All right, let me get my screen share set up. And yeah, a little bit of apology. I'm going to go ahead and just fall back to my slides as well, just since we're so close on time. And yeah, relations sometimes aren't very gentle on bandwidth. So let me see, where are we? Yeah, okay, you guys got my screen.
Yep, we can see your screen well.
All right, perfect. So yeah, just to kind of kick off relations, you know, I'm in no way a database expert. So as far as how relations actually work behind the scenes, I'm not going to go into that stuff, but I'll hopefully give you guys enough where, you know, if you come across a relation in the wild or find yourself in a situation where you need to use relations, that you'll have a basic understanding of how to make them work for you. So I'm just looking here at the wiki page for relations. You can see, you know, most of these are either de facto relations or have been approved. There's still a couple that are sort of under proposal. But this will give you a basic idea of what relations are used for in the various sort of schema that's out there. And just kind of jumping in JOSM, there's kind of a few ways that you can discover relations. Typically, you know, I come across them while I'm trying to edit a road or something and notice that it has this member of. So you can know that the feature you have selected is actually part of a relation, and that's, you know, very important before you start editing the feature itself, to know that you might also be affecting a relation and need to deal with stuff there. Also, right in this right now, it's actually not selected as a relation, but if I had the relation selected, you would see that in here. And then also you have your relations sort of panel where you can see all the relations that are in your view right now. This is an area close to home for me, so there's you know, some national forest boundaries. There's the county boundary itself is in the view here. Multi-polygons for some natural features, as well as some hiking routes and highways. Before we get into a complex relation, typically the one that you're going to find the most, I think most, you know, kind of newer mappers will come across a multi-polygon usage of relations before anything else. The simplest one to talk about and demonstrate is like a courtyard in a building. So in this case, I just drew one real quick. It's not actually there on the ground, but just as an example, we draw basically two buildings, one inside of the other, and then we use the tools menu to find the create multi-polygon, or it's Control B, as you can see there, and that will snap those two things into a relation that shows, you know, that this outer wall is the outside of the relation, and this inner building or the inner wall is the courtyard itself, and then it's going to give us a nice hole in the middle. And now you can also see that the multi-polygon that I created is now in the relations panel as well. not a great example, but just up the road here, there's another use case that I've come across quite a lot, and that is pitches and tracks. So I don't know if it's common elsewhere in the world, but typically high schools and colleges will have, you know, their football field, and then around the football field is a track, and you want to, you know, represent that that field is a different pitch than the track that runs around it. I should have done a better job of, you know, the track doesn't actually come up right to the field, but I just, for example, you might find the multi-polygon used that way as well. So you can create new relations. You know, it's pretty easy. There's actually a nice little button down here that's to create a relation, and you get this create new relation role data layer box. It's got a sort of weird name, but you know, this is the sort of editor for creating new relations. You can add keys to the relation itself. So, you know, going back to the wiki, you want to put the type of relation, you know, so type equals multi-polygon or type equals route, any other tags that are going to be sort of on the parent relation. So, you know, typically, you know, when you're talking about relations in databases, it's like a parent-child thing. So you have like a parent feature that collects information related to all the children that are part of that relation. And then, yeah, and then you can add members down in here. And I won't go too far into just creating a random relation. Let's actually jump into looking at some existing ones. So in this case, I'm going to start looking at the road relations that are in this area. First thing you'll probably find, and it's kind of hard to see, maybe if I jump back a few, you'll see a lot of these say incomplete as far as the relation in the relations panel here. And what that means is that you are not looking at all of the members. So, you know, some of the members that you're looking at now are part of this relation, but you don't actually have all of the members that make up the relation downloaded. So the first thing, if you're going to be, especially when it comes to boundaries or larger features, you're going to want to make sure that you have all of the members downloaded so that, you know, you can visualize them in JOSM, and you know, you don't accidentally like disconnect one that you don't have downloaded and can't immediately fix. So you can just right click on the route. So in this case, I'm right clicking on the Highway 285 relation, and then just go up to download members. And that'll get us, you know, all the members in that route. So, you know, we were looking, the zoomed in area is somewhere up in here, but the whole US Highway 285 in Colorado at least goes from Denver down to the New Mexico border. Oop, one too far. And you know, a little bit more about the relation itself. So now you can, you know, now that I have the relation selected, you can see all the tags that are applied to it. And now it's also represented in the route thing. And sorry, my mouse is like having this really weird hover effect through Zoom. So I'm trying to point at things. It's just not easy. And then, yeah, the next sort of relation that comes into play with routes is, you know, at least in the US, how we've done the major road networks is they have their state relations. So all the members of that road, you know, bridges, all those things that make up Highway 285 in Colorado, as well as New Mexico and Texas. And then those are all put together with what we call a super relation or a super route. So you can see this one here that's labeled as super is actually taking all the members of the Colorado relation, all the members of the New Mexico relation, all the members of the Texas relation, and giving a way to link all of those together to show that this is Highway 285 in the United States. Some even more complex relations or boundaries. So you can just see here, I have all the members of Pike National Forest highlighted here, and there's some other stuff, like I think it's still highlighting Highway 285 as it goes through, but the ones that are kind of circled in red are the forest boundaries. And especially with boundaries, they get really complicated because oftentimes these boundaries represent multiple things. So in this case, these boundaries along the west of Pike National Forest are also or some of them are also members of the Park County division, counties in the U.S., it's basically counties or municipalities, counties, states, up to the country. So this lowest denomination sort of governmental unit of the county also shares its boundaries with rivers and roads and national forest. So you can have maybe a little piece over here on the west might actually be a member of half a dozen different boundary relations. And that's why especially with the humanitarian work, we really try to tell people to kind of avoid manipulating things that are on boundaries unless they really know what they're doing as it comes to relations, because sometimes there is like a river that's a country border or something, and the river geometry isn't very good and needs to be cleaned up, but it's going to affect that boundary as well, and just making sure that we preserve that relationship. So yeah, taking a step back to the simple multi-polygon building courtyard example, we'll actually open up the editor and kind of show you how you can edit these features and what you're looking at when you have the editor in front of you. So yeah, there's a little button here. So you select your relation in the relations menu, you click the little edit button, and you get this window. And of course, in this case, it's a very simple polygon. You can see the roles. If I can get my mouse to cooperate, you've got, there we go. You've got inner and outer roles on this one. So it's just simply one is the outer role, one is the inner. On something like a forest polygon, you might have a bunch of different inner and outer. So here's the South Park grassland here in pretty close to the middle of the state of Colorado. But in order to have this, and I guess I'll step back a little bit, is one of the reasons why we use relations even on something as simple as like a boundary is because each way can only have 2,000 nodes. So you can see that the geometry for this particular feature is very complex, and it's probably several thousand nodes just to make this kind of corner. And so that piece is going to be limited, and then you got to start a new piece beyond wherever you run out of your 2,000 nodes and continue all the way around, and then put all of those pieces back together using a relation. And that's another sort of very common use. So long rivers, things like that are going to need a relation in order to put all the individual pieces together. And as kind of like I was talking, I kind of just did this as an example. I didn't actually save this, but there's this, I think this is the middle fork of the South Platte River. Sorry, there's 3 forks for that river. I always forget which one this is. So yeah, this is the middle fork, and it was broken at this bridge. There was a piece of it going this way, there was a piece of it going towards the southeast, and then another piece, I think, up towards the northwest, and none of them were connected because, again, probably running out of the number of nodes in each individual segment. So, I just created a new route, or I mean a new relation, which is a waterway relation. So actually, I could already up here in the key put type equals waterway, and then add in those 3 pieces and make myself a relation that represents the entire length of that river. So now you can see it all filled out. And then finally, yeah, I guess if you don't notice here, it's not technically broken, but in the icons here, it's kind of showing a little bit of out of order. So I can actually just use the sort buttons over here on the left to sort it, and now it shows it as running from this segment into the next segment into the next segment. That gets a little more useful, or I guess sometimes more complicated and a pain when you have really long relations. So here I'm looking at, back to looking at the relation of US Highway 285 throughout Colorado. You can see it's got 578 members. So, again, those are little segments of road, where they change lanes is a different segment than, so if it's 2-way highway for a while, and then there's like a passing lane, that gets broken up into a new segment. The bridges obviously are as we've seen today, get broken into a new segment. So yeah, in order to get all of that back into place and get it all lined up is not the easiest thing to do. And this is kind of my last slide here. Actually, I might have one more, but I just want to really kind of point out that these icons are kind of your savior. You can hover over them and it'll say what's wrong. So this one isn't connected to the previous one or the next. So sometimes it's hard to exactly find out what the issue is in getting this back into a straight line. Obviously, there probably shouldn't be a loop in the middle of a highway. Doesn't really make too much sense. But yeah, just in general, the black lines that look connected to each other, you're good. If you get a little red knob there, it means it's not connected to the next one. And then yeah, these ones that are kind of sideways mean they're disconnected on one or the other ends. It's not really sure, or it could be both. The loops, you will find good loops inside of multi-polygons. So if you have like a lake with an island in the middle, you're going to use a relation to represent that. So you have an outer way or multiple ways that make up the lakeshore boundary, and then you'll have a very similar one that makes up the island shore boundary. And as long as those 2 loops are correct, typically I don't think I have a screenshot of one, but if the upper one is all looped together and that's your outside polygon, and then there's one down here that's a loop, that's your inside polygon, you're good to go. It's just when especially with the multi-polygons, if the loops are broken, you have some problems with your relation. So yeah, that was a real short one, but we're right at time, which is great. So I'm gonna go ahead and unmute everybody, or at least allow you to unmute yourself, and then we can do a little bit of Q&A, unless anybody's got to drop off. Do any of our presenters need to drop off right away?
No, I'm still okay for a while longer.
No problem for me either.
Great. Well, yeah, I guess we can hang out and do some questions if anybody has any. I guess, Michael, I have a question about your comment. So what does an empty relation do? Is there any reason for them?
Well, I really don't have I wouldn't see an application for that, because if you don't have any members, then a normal way or a point would do to mark something in particular. So I've seen those, but I guess this was an error. I mean, these relations probably contained some ways, and the ways were deleted one after the other for whatsoever reason, but nobody took care of that empty shell of the relation, which no longer had anything really meaningful.
Yeah, so it's kind of like somebody draws.
I think it's something like an orphaned object, maybe. You could call it like that, yeah.
Yeah, but it's akin to somebody drawing, the blank building. It's there, it's sort of useful, but it isn't complete without some tags. And you're probably right. I think I've maybe done that before, where I started like a forest boundary or something, and then changed the way I was doing the relation, and ended up deleting all of the members from that relation, but didn't delete the relation until later. Yeah, thanks for all the comments. Yeah, this is probably going to be our last webinar for the year. I think it'll actually probably be Geoffrey and the Uganda team that does the next webinar. Geoffrey, do you have any timeline on when you guys might do that?
Yes, I think that will be around January. We have to fix a particular date, but it's most likely to be in January.
Okay, great. Yeah, so maybe end of December, look for some promo, and hopefully we'll actually have a time and place to register by then.
Yeah, sure.
Well, great. Yeah, I'll give it another minute or two, but if nobody has any questions for us, then we can call it a day. And of course, via email or Slack or whatever your best method of communication, reach out to us if something pops in your head later, or once you start playing with some of the stuff we talked about. If there's additional questions, we'd love to know. And like I said, it's great to get people's tips and tricks as well. So if we demonstrated something that you do differently, and just want to throw out the concept of how you do it, and I'm sure we'd be glad to hear it, and maybe you'll convert some of us. Yeah, Michael, Ralph, Geoffrey, thank you so much for helping put this together. I do not mind at all being the middleman between the community and training working groups to make these happen. So yeah, hopefully in 2019 we'll continue the trend of sprinkling in some training with the community webinars.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has shown the keen interest to come along and listen to us and to better their mapping experience. Happy mapping, everyone.
Yes, thanks for your interest also from my side. Spending 2 hours here on a webinar is something which is not easy. So thanks for having made this decision, and yes, happy mapping in future.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and happy mapping everyone.
All right, with that, we'll call it a day, and everybody have a good weekend.